Patreon Q&A number 133. I want to thank all 125 of my amazing patrons. Guys, thank you so much for continuing to support me the way that you have. And to everyone else listening, there's going to be spoilers for all of the series I'm going to be talking about, so tread carefully. Professor asks, do you expect Deku to soon be as powerful as Prime All Might, or do you think the series will end before that point? So it's hard to say because we've never really seen Prime All Might in action. We've only kind of just heard about what he has accomplished for the most part. But as I always kind of point back to when trying to gauge how strong Prime All Might was, we should look at the power grid scale thing from the Two Heroes movie that David Shield puts together after like analyzing All Might. And it shows that All Might was more or less kind of accurate in what he said regarding his punches going against the USJ Nomu, like how it took like 300 or 200 punches to finish him off, but it only would have taken 5 in his prime, or I'm paraphrasing, but it's just saying that like we've only really seen like 5 or around that percentage of his actual strength like in the series. And it just always made me think that like in his prime, he was like unfairly powerful pretty much, especially for the My Hero world. One of the bonus chapters for Team Up Missions Volume 1, I think we might be seeing Prime All Might, and he straight up like punches a tornado away. I'm not exactly sure of the timeline of that, but considering that Rebecca was young in that chapter, it might line up with like maybe right before he was nerfed by All For One possibly. So that means that Izuku would have to go above and beyond what we've seen at his current max. And I guess his max that we've seen was him going against Shigaraki in the war when he was basically, you know, using 100%. And he was clearly really powerful at that point, but nothing that like a post Prime All Might wasn't really capable of, I don't think. Like that looked like maybe what a USJ All Might or maybe a Kamino All Might could have done to plus Ultra Shigaraki. But we also have to remember that the One For All that Izuku has is a more powerful version than what All Might had, you know, due to the quirk singularity and how One For All progresses and whatnot. So it's possible that once he fully unlocks all of the power with One For All and his body and just everything about him is fully able to utilize 100%, including all of the quirks and how they synergize with each other possibly, he very likely could be as strong as Prime All Might at his peak, or maybe even stronger than him. And I think we will probably see that before the series ends. I don't think Horikoshi will leave us hanging on that, especially since he set up Chekhov's plus Ultra Shigaraki as well. It's been established that obviously we haven't seen Shigaraki at his peak, and I think in chapter 304 or 305, it once again brought up that like, hey, if he becomes full power, he likely will not be able to be stopped. So I'm assuming that that means that we will probably see 100% plus Ultra Shigaraki taking on 100% Izuku, and I hope that it's like the greatest display of power that we've ever seen in the series. But I have a feeling that it will ultimately just be subjective even at that point. Like, I doubt that we'll ever see Prime All Might in action, unfortunately. Therefore, we'll never really know who truly is stronger since we won't really be able to have anything to compare. But Izuku will be incredibly powerful by the end of the series, much stronger than what we've seen at his peak. I do think that for sure will happen. Delamante asks, I think you said you've seen Bleach, so my question is, if you could swap one character in Bleach into Jujutsu Kaisen as a sorcerer and vice versa, which characters would you choose and why? This is a good question. And I guess I would swap Kenpachi and Okkotsu. Mainly because I love Kenpachi. He's one of my favorite characters from Bleach, and I think he would fit well into the Jujutsu Kaisen world. He'd be like a more aggressive Todo or something. And also him and Okkotsu both have that like overwhelming Raietsu or cursed energy aspect to them. But Okkotsu over in the Bleach world, if his curse technique were to translate over to like his Zanpakuto or Bankai ability or whatever, that would be super interesting. Like his ability would just be copying the Shikai or the Bankai or just the abilities of his opponents. And I don't think we've seen that in Bleach, right? So that would be pretty incredible. Garrett M asks, how powerful do you think Usopp is going to get and what will his bounty be? I assume by the end, Usopp's bounty will be over 1 billion, especially if he keeps having those miracle-like accidents happening to him that like artificially inflates his, you know, standing in the world, kind of like what happened in Dressrosa. Especially if Luffy is ultimately recognized as like, you know, a consensus Yonko or just Emperor Emperor coming out of Wano. And as for how powerful he will be, I think he'll just go further into observation haki. I don't see him getting armament, but I do see him getting observation haki that may surpass all of the Straw Hats possibly, or maybe he'll just unlock more aspects to it that the others haven't. Maybe he'll get the voice of all things possibly, or something similar to that. I think if we go to Elbaf, that's where Usopp is going to get his power up. Second question, current webcomic armored Moomin Rider versus Stinger. This is just a wash for Moomin Rider. In that suit, he's way powerful, like way stronger than Stinger. He's definitely S-class level, considering that he one-shotted a demon, which Stinger probably couldn't solo a low demon by himself. I mean, if he could, it would be like the highest diff ever. So yeah, Moomin Rider, no problem here. Jared B asks, do you think Black S might become more of a Dimple from Mob Psycho character instead of a future villain? It's possible, but I don't think that's going to happen. Right now, it just doesn't seem like Black S has good intentions. I think he's ultimately going to just try to become, you know, the ultimate monster or villain, or I mean, his motives aren't really clear, but I don't think any of them are altruistic at this point, especially, I forget what chapter it is, but he talks about how, you know, you have to defeat Saitama by being cunning. And I think that might give some insight into what his future plans are. Maybe he does have some kind of plan to get Saitama out of the picture because he obviously acknowledges him as the one above all. And then for your second question, do you think Blast is stronger than Boros? If I had to bet on it, I would say Blast is probably stronger than him, but it's just too difficult for me personally to say at this point. Could Boros do that to Flashy Flash? Maybe, maybe not, I'm not sure, but Blast does seem ridiculous, and if not stronger than Boros, then he's right up there on his level. Jimmy P asks, I'm hoping that you've got Darwin's game in your repertoire. I'm sorry, Jimmy, I don't. I didn't even know what Darwin's game was before you asked this question, but I did look it up and I read the plot and it seems pretty interesting. It reminds me of like Saw and that Korean game show Genius Game. And I did read up on the sigil thing, and it is possible that it wasn't random. And maybe there is some kind of genetic algorithm, or there's some other significance to it. I mean, I would need to go more into it and actually read this series, but on the surface right now, I would say that's kind of a good guess. I also looked into the season 2 stuff, and so far I don't think there's any news on it. If anything, there's a lot of fake news out there, but considering that it's still going on, you know, in the manga, I would say, you know, just give it some time, maybe in 2 years or something. Joe D asks, how much do you think we could trust the webcomic to predict the future manga events at this point? Do you personally want to see the stories follow close together, or would you enjoy some manga-only arcs? No, I don't want them to follow close together anymore. I like that they're 2 different stories at this point. It's so refreshing, and it makes following the 2 different series that much more enjoyable. But I do think that they're ultimately telling the same story. Like, the major significant things that are going to happen in the webcomic will definitely happen in the manga as well. They're just going to go about it 2 different ways. Your second question, it seems inevitable that Muscular is about to job to Deku in My Hero to show off how strong Deku has become since their last encounter. Do you think a more powerful opponent will appear, or will the fight be pretty quick? So yeah, I do think Muscular will probably job to Deku. Not sure how easy it will be for him, but I do think it won't be the squash match that it originally was. It ultimately comes down to how Izuku's body is, you know, post the time skip from him coming out of the war. Not sure if a more powerful person is going to show up, but I think the fight will last at least 1 chapter, maybe 2. L asks, when Gojo goes into his domain expansion, I could see Saitama walking out of it, but not many others. Am I overvaluing him with recency bias, thinking he's an above dragon being, or dare I say it, I assume you're talking about God level. So I'm not going to touch on the Saitama statement, but I will say that in the Jujutsu Kaisen world, Gojo is absolutely an above dragon, if not even just straight up God level. I mean, no spoilers even involved. I can say that with confidence. Little Ferrari asks, do you think Bomb will play more of a role in the manga than he does in the webcomic? Yes. How much more significance will he have? Not really sure, but he'll definitely have more moments. I think he's going to have a few more extended fights against the cadres for sure, and I don't think he's going to kill any of them, but I think he will wound them, or at least give some good assists to Bang and the other S-Class heroes, but he'll probably ultimately be taken out the same way, which is, you know, kind of unceremoniously. Mr.Awsome asks, who do you think would win in a fight between Garp, Roger, and Whitebeard in their prime versus all the current Yonko and the Admirals? So this is a great question, and I'm leaning more towards prime Garp, Roger, and Whitebeard, considering that Garp and Roger in their primes, I guess it's implied that just the both of them took down everyone at God Valley, which was nearly a collection of all the strongest people in the world at that point. And now they have Prime Whitebeard on their side. I'm thinking that they would probably take the current Yonkos and Admirals. It wouldn't be easy, but I think they would get the job done. Second question, would you rather be an A-class hero from One Punch Man or a Vice Admiral from One Piece? Definitely a Vice Admiral from One Piece. They get to travel, go on adventures, and, you know, do cool stuff. A-class heroes are kind of just always putting their life on the line, and they're always at a serious power disadvantage if they're going against anything above Tiger. Natedawg asks, have you started Invincible yet? I love it so far, but the end of the episode was a little too much for me, but I'm still loving the start. How strong do you think Omni-Man is? So I haven't watched a full episode of it yet, but I was suggested what I think you're talking about, the ending here on YouTube. Like the thumbnail was somebody's head getting crushed, and I was like, well, I gotta click that. And I'll tell you that Invincible is way more graphic than what I thought it was going to be. The trailer didn't make it out to seem like that, at least from what I remember. So as for how strong he is, it ultimately depends on how strong the guys he's killing are. But he seems to be, you know, relative to like Superman, at least for that world. But yeah, I will eventually watch Invincible. I mean, the clip that I watched definitely intrigued me. Parkhertruck asks, how do you think a fight between Yuta and Mahoraga would go? So I think it would be competitive, but Okkotsu would probably win, especially with the assist of Rika. I mean, if 15-finger Sukuna was able to defeat Mahoraga, I assume that Okkotsu probably could, especially since in the most recent chapter, Yuji thinks that Okkotsu could defeat Sukuna at even 20 fingers. So, I guess Okkotsu could do it. It probably wouldn't be easy, though. Phoenix Man asks, what do you think the potential of Fubuki is? So, I think the manga will definitely show us more of what she is capable of than what the webcomic has so far. I mean, because it still hasn't come to her fight against Psychos yet, and I'm sure she'll have more crazy feats there, aside from just the psychic whirlwind. But I think her potential will eventually wind up with her being like a dragon, probably, and for sure an S-class hero. If the Hero Association is still a thing after the Neo Heroes arc / organization arc, I do think that she will be included in the S-class heroes for sure. I mean, she has like a handful of what could be considered S-class level feats already. Sean H asks, with the last chapter of My Hero with Shindo and Muscular, got me thinking of potential student versus villain fights coming up in this arc. There are a few I wanted to see in the war, like Bakugo versus Genin or Shoji versus Spinner, but unfortunately the war was more of a versus Shigaraki arc. What would be some of your dream ones? So there's not really a lot of like intriguing villain versus hero matchups that I have personally, because in my opinion, there isn't like a lot of analogs to like the heroes on the villain side. Like in my opinion, Bakugo would wash most of the League of Villains outside of like Shigaraki, but I'm personally more intrigued in like hero versus hero matchups. Like I want to see like the Shiketsu and Ketsubutsu students go against the students from UA, or just Billboard heroes going against other Billboard heroes, honestly. Snowpeas asks, Baba Booey. Hey Snowpeas. Baba Booey. Right back at you, bro. Steven asks, Genos tells Drive Knight he wants a second opinion instead of jumping the gun, and the same day Kuseno gets whacked. So I guess either Genos needs to accept a new mechanic from Drive Knight / Neo Heroes, or Kuseno is going to get Cyberized thoughts. Hey, that's a great point you bring up, Steven, and I didn't talk about it in my review, but yeah, I mean, I ultimately thought that Drive Knight was going to use that as motivation for Genos to go after Metal Knight, but it also works in the favor of Genos needing a new mechanic now, and wouldn't you know it, the Neo Heroes do have that aspect to them, so maybe that's how he tricks Genos over to not only joining Drive Knight's side, but also going over to the Neo Heroes and then getting augmented so that they can, like, you know, flip the switch on him and make them subservient to him, what they have been doing with the Neo Heroes. The Anomaly asks, how would you feel if One for All Vestiges had a quirk similar to Blast Power? With those weird gravity energy balls, can you envision Deku with a similar conceptual power? I think it would be sick. I think it would be sick too, and I could definitely see it happening, but I think it's probably unlikely, mainly because it's so ridiculously overpowered. I mean, first of all, Blast is already overpowered because of that, but if this quirk were to exist in My Hero, it would easily be one of the most powerful quirks to ever exist. And that would mean that either the third or the second, unlikely that the sixth had it, but either the third or second user had this, and now that Izuku would gain this quirk, he would go to a whole other level of being overpowered. I wouldn't be mad at it. I think it would be pretty cool, and I would totally be on board with it, but I could definitely see the fandom having an issue with Izuku having access to this level of power. Wolfire54 asks, I just wanted to ask again, but do you think Suiko looks a lot more like Casca from Berserk now that she has been revealed in the manga? Absolutely, she looks just like her, and like you brought up before, Tatsumaki looks like that other witch character from Berserk, and I'm starting to think that it's not a coincidence, and that one is probably definitely a big fan of Berserk, and he's drawn quite a bit of inspiration from that series, and there might even be parallels to like what we talked about before with Blast and the Skull Knight. Second question, which character from My Hero do you think King could relate with more or could empathize with? All Might, with them both having people relying on them, but they are afraid of letting them down and have to keep up a lie. Hey, you hit the nail on the head right there. Injured All Might, or true form All Might, whatever they refer to him as, skinny All Might, is the perfect character that King could relate to because they're both extremely similar. They both represent, in a way, the symbol of peace in their own respective universes, but they're both ultimately weak and can only do so much. So yeah, that's a great little comparison that you draw up there, Wolffire. So that's pretty much it for the video today, guys. Once again, I want to thank all 125 of my amazing patrons. If you would like to be in next week's Q&A, simply check out the Patreon. The link will be in the description, and the $5 tier will give you access to this video. If you haven't already, please subscribe as well. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.